Why does silence feel like punishment to a narcissist even when you are not attacking, not blaming, not demanding anything at all? This is the question most people never stop to examine because from the outside, silence looks passive, neutral, even harmless. You are not yelling, you are not explaining, you are not trying to win. You are simply not there emotionally anymore. Yet to a narcissist, this absence does not register as neutrality. It registers as cruelty. It registers as rejection. It registers as something deeply unfair, and that reaction alone tells us something important. Silence is not experienced by them as nothing. It is experienced as something being taken away. A narcissist does not interpret silence the way a psychologically grounded person does. To a healthy mind, silence may mean space, reflection, or a boundary. To a narcissistic mind, silence feels like punishment because their sense of self has always depended on response. They are not oriented inward. They do not feel real simply by existing. They feel real when someone reacts to them. When you speak, argue, explain, defend yourself, cry, or even express anger, you are feeding a loop that confirms their relevance. Your reaction tells them, "I matter enough to move you." When that reaction disappears, the narcissist does not experience calm. They experience destabilization. Silence removes the feedback they use to locate themselves in the world, and without that feedback, their inner structure begins to wobble. This is why they describe silence using moral language, calling it cold, abusive, or cruel. They are not describing your intent, they are describing their internal panic. From their perspective, silence feels like punishment because it strips them of access. It takes away their ability to provoke, regulate, and control the emotional field between you. They no longer know where they stand, not because you are hiding something, but because their position only ever existed through interaction. Silence feels punitive because it leaves no handle to grab, no lever to pull, no button to press. It is not that you are doing something to them, it is that you have stopped doing something for them. And what you stopped providing was not kindness or love. You stopped providing orientation. You stopped providing a mirror. You stopped providing proof of importance. To the narcissistic psyche, that loss feels indistinguishable from being sentenced. There is no trial, no explanation, no dramatic ending, no chance to flip the story. Silence offers no narrative they can control. There is no villain role they can assign you, no argument they can win, no emotional climax where they regain dominance. That unresolved absence feels intolerable. It feels like being left in a locked room with no exit and no audience. This is why narcissists often escalate when met with silence. They are not reacting to distance. They are reacting to the collapse of a system that once revolved around their ability to extract response. Silence feels like punishment because it denies them the one thing they rely on to feel alive: impact. And the deeper truth, the one rarely spoken out loud, is this: the silence itself is not cruel. What feels cruel is being forced, even briefly, to face life without borrowed significance. If this resonates with your experience and you have felt the confusion of being accused of cruelty simply for going quiet, stay with this video. In the next sections, we will break down exactly what collapses inside a narcissist when silence appears, why they react the way they do, and how understanding this dynamic can free you from guilt, doubt, and the urge to explain yourself. If this topic speaks to you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe for deeper psychological insights, and share your experience in the comments, because your silence was never punishment, it was a boundary, and understanding that distinction changes everything. To understand why silence feels like punishment to a narcissist, you have to understand something that is deeply uncomfortable but absolutely central to their psychology. A narcissist does not experience themselves as real in isolation. Their sense of existence is not internally generated. It is externally assembled, moment by moment through reaction. This is not metaphorical. For a narcissist, response is not optional feedback, it is structural support. They do not wake up with a stable sense of "I am." They wake up with a need to locate themselves, and that location happens through impact. When someone reacts to them, positively or negatively, something inside them locks into place. They feel solid. They feel oriented. They feel like they exist. This is why arguments never exhaust them the way they exhaust you. This is why drama feels energizing to them rather than draining. This is why even your anger once felt useful to them. Your reactions were never just emotional exchanges. They were confirmations of being. As long as you reacted, the narcissist knew where they stood. They could measure their influence. They could feel their weight in the room. Reaction told them, I am still central. I still matter enough to move someone. When you spoke, explained, defended, or even begged to be understood, you were unknowingly stabilizing a self that cannot stand on its own. Now contrast that with silence. When you stop reacting, you are not just removing communication, you are removing the scaffolding that held their sense of self upright. Silence does not register to them as distance, it registers as disorientation. They do not experience it as, you need space, they experience it as, I cannot feel myself. This is where the panic begins, because without reaction there is no reference point, there is no emotional echo to bounce off, there is no signal confirming their relevance, and without relevance, the narcissistic psyche does not default to calm, it defaults to threat. Silence creates a condition where they are forced to confront something they spend their entire lives avoiding, the absence of an internal core. This is why they often describe silence as abandonment, even when no relationship has been formally ended. This is why they accuse you of cruelty for doing nothing. In their internal logic, if you are not reacting, you are not affirming their existence, and if you are not affirming their existence, you are actively harming them. That is how distorted the equation becomes. Reaction equals existence. No reaction equals annihilation. From this perspective, silence does not feel neutral. It feels existential. It feels like being erased in real time. This also explains why narcissists are far more distressed by indifference than by confrontation. Confrontation still places them at the center of your emotional world. Indifference removes them from it. Silence communicates something far more threatening than anger ever could. You no longer have an effect on me. To a narcissist, that message is unbearable because effect is the only proof of self they have ever known. Without it, they are left floating, unanchored, with no internal structure to fall back on. This is why silence feels like punishment, not because you are punishing them, but because you are no longer performing the psychological labor they depended on. You are no longer regulating their sense of being. You are no longer confirming their importance. And when that confirmation disappears, the narcissist experiences it not as a boundary, but as a loss of reality itself. In the next part, we will look at how this loss of reaction quickly transforms into a loss of control, and why that loss is experienced by a narcissist not just as discomfort, but as a form of psychological confinement they would do almost anything to escape. Once reaction disappears, something far more threatening takes its place for a narcissist: loss of control. This is the point where silence stops feeling merely uncomfortable and starts feeling punitive. A narcissist is not oriented around mutual connection, they are oriented around regulation. They regulate their inner chaos by controlling the emotional field around them. As long as they can provoke, soothe, intimidate, charm, or confuse you, they remain psychologically upright. Control is not a preference for them, it is a survival function. When you are reactive, even negatively, the narcissist can still steer the interaction. They can escalate, de-escalate, rewrite the narrative, or bait you into another emotional position. Reaction gives them handles. Silence removes every handle at once. When you go silent, the narcissist no longer knows where they stand with you, and more importantly, they no longer know where they stand with themselves. There is no signal to interpret, no emotional temperature to read, no feedback loop to manipulate. This creates a state of suspended uncertainty that is deeply intolerable to a narcissistic psyche. They are used to moving people like pieces on a board. Silence removes the board. Suddenly there is no next move, no counter-move, no strategy that reliably works. From the outside, this may look like calm. Internally, it feels like confinement. The narcissist experiences this loss of control not as a neutral boundary, but as being trapped inside a situation they cannot dominate. That is why silence feels like punishment. It places them in a position they work obsessively to avoid, powerlessness. And powerlessness, for a narcissist, is not just an emotion, it is an existential threat. Without control, their grandiose self-PO begins to fracture. They can no longer tell themselves the story that they are superior, desired, or central. Silence refuses to confirm or deny that story. It simply does not participate in it. That absence of participation is experienced as cruelty because it forces the narcissist to sit with uncertainty. They do not know if you are angry, indifferent, relieved, or healed. They do not know if they still matter or if they have already been replaced psychologically. And because narcissists rely on certainty to maintain dominance, uncertainty feels like being punished without knowing the charge. There is no accusation to argue against. There is no conversation to hijack. There is no emotional leverage to exploit. Silence creates a psychological dead zone where their usual tactics fail, and failure is something their structure cannot metabolize. This is why narcissists often accuse silent partners of being manipulative or abusive. It is projection. They experience the loss of control as an attack because they only understand relationships through power. If they are not controlling, they feel controlled. If they are not dominating, they feel dominated. Silence places them in a state where neither is possible, and that ambiguity is experienced as unbearable. It feels like being locked out of a system they once ran. The narcissist does not feel punished because you are hurting them. They feel punished because you are no longer available to be used as an extension of their will. You are no longer participating in their emotional economy. They cannot extract reassurance, fear, anger, or admiration from you, and without extraction they feel deprived. Deprivation in their mind equals punishment. This is also why silence often triggers escalation. When control is lost, they attempt to regain it through any means necessary. They provoke, accuse, love bomb, threaten, or disappear and reappear, not because they suddenly care, but because they are trying to restore a sense of agency. Silence denies them that restoration. It leaves them stuck in a loop where no move produces the desired effect. Over time, this creates a sense of internal pressure. The narcissist feels compressed, contained, and cornered by the very absence of engagement. That pressure is misinterpreted as external cruelty rather than internal collapse. Silence in reality is not doing anything to them. It is simply no longer doing anything for them. But because their psychology depends on influence, the absence of influence feels like punishment. In the next section, we will look at how this loss of control begins to destabilize the narcissist's persona itself, and why the cracking of that mask is experienced not as growth, but as a verdict they cannot escape. When silence persists, the narcissist is no longer just dealing with discomfort or loss of control. They are confronting something far more destabilizing, the weakening of the persona itself. The persona is not simply a social mask for a narcissist. It is the structure that holds them together. It is the carefully constructed identity that says who they are, how they are seen, and why they matter. This structure does not live independently. It is fed by attention, reinforced by reaction, and maintained through interaction. Silence starves it. Without feedback, the persona begins to thin, and as it thins, the narcissist experiences a specific kind of fear that is difficult to name but impossible to ignore. They are not afraid of being disliked. They are afraid of becoming undefined. When there is no audience, there is no role. When there is no role, there is no self they recognize. Silence removes the stage, and with it, the sense of being someone in the world. This is why silence feels like a verdict rather than a pause. It does not feel temporary to them. It feels final. A narcissist expects conflict to end with a scene, a reversal, or a victory. Silence offers none of these. It offers no closure they can control, no narrative they can spin, no moral position they can occupy with confidence. Instead, it leaves them suspended in a space where the persona cannot perform and therefore cannot reassure them of their worth. In that suspension, something they have long kept buried begins to surface. Shame does not appear all at once. It leaks in. It comes as irritation, restlessness, agitation, and an urge to do something, anything, to reassert presence. Silence does not accuse them, yet it exposes them. It exposes the fact that their identity requires participation to exist. Without someone responding, mirroring, or resisting, the persona has nothing to push against. It collapses inward. This collapse is not dramatic at first. It is subtle, but it is relentless. The narcissist begins to feel unseen, and to them, being unseen is not a neutral state. It is annihilation. They have equated visibility with value for so long that the absence of recognition feels like being erased. This is why they often describe silence as humiliating. Humiliation in this context is not about being embarrassed publicly. It is about being stripped of the mechanisms that once protected them from their own emptiness. Silence does not shame them by pointing out flaws. It shames them by refusing to validate the persona at all. There is no reflection to confirm that the mask is working. There is no interaction to reassure them that the image still holds power. This creates a profound internal contradiction. On the surface, nothing is happening. Internally, everything is destabilizing. The narcissist feels judged without a judge, punished without a punisher, and condemned without a sentence. This is why silence is experienced as a verdict. It feels like a silent declaration that says, "You no longer qualify. Qualify for attention, qualify for relevance, qualify for impact." And because the persona was never rooted in a stable inner self, it cannot survive this withdrawal of energy. The narcissist may attempt to inflate the persona elsewhere, seeking new audiences, new admirers, or new conflicts, but the original silence remains unresolved. It lingers as proof that there exists a space where their persona has no authority. That knowledge is intolerable. It introduces the idea that their power is conditional, not absolute. Silence forces the narcissist to confront a reality they work tirelessly to avoid, that their sense of identity is borrowed, not owned. That confrontation does not lead to insight. It leads to rage, denial, or frantic attempts to re-engage. Growth would require sitting with the collapse and building something real beneath it. Silence does not provide instructions for that. It simply removes the illusion. And removal of illusion to a narcissist feels like being sentenced. Not because someone declared them guilty, but because the persona they relied on is no longer being sustained. In the next section, we will examine why this collapse is experienced not just as personal pain, but as rejection, abandonment, and erasure all at once, and why those combined experiences make silence feel like the harshest punishment imaginable to a narcissistic psyche. As the persona weakens under silence, the narcissist's internal experience intensifies in a very specific way. Silence no longer registers as a single loss. It fractures into three simultaneous psychological wounds: rejection, abandonment, and erasure. For a psychologically integrated person, these experiences are distinct. Rejection means someone does not choose you. Abandonment means someone leaves. Erasure means being ignored or overlooked. But for a narcissist, these collapse into one overwhelming sensation because their inner structure cannot separate them. Silence triggers all three at once. It feels like rejection because your lack of response communicates something their psyche cannot tolerate. You are not important enough to provoke a reaction. This is not how a narcissist hears silence consciously. They do not hear neutrality. They hear disqualification. Reaction once meant confirmation of worth. Silence now feels like a verdict that their worth is insufficient. That perceived rejection cuts deeper than words ever could because it does not argue, it does not negotiate, it simply removes access. And removal of access is interpreted as judgment. At the same time, silence feels like abandonment. Narcissists carry a primitive terror of being left, not because they crave intimacy, but because being left means being unregulated. When you disengage without drama, explanation, or emotional residue, you are not giving them a chance to tether to you psychologically. They experience this as being dropped into emotional freefall. There is no hand to grab, no emotional cord to pull, no reassurance that they still occupy space in your inner world. This is why they often accuse silent partners of being heartless. They are not responding to loss of connection, they are responding to loss of containment. You are no longer holding the emotional tension for them. And then there is the third wound, the one they almost never name but feel most acutely: erasure. Silence makes the narcissist feel as though they are being written out of existence. When you do not respond, you are not confirming that they are still part of your psychological reality. To a narcissist, this feels worse than being hated. Hatred still acknowledges presence. Silence does not. Silence communicates, "You are not part of my inner narrative anymore." And for a psyche built entirely around being central to someone else's narrative, this feels like annihilation. These three experiences do not arrive separately. They arrive as one crushing sensation of being expelled from relevance. This is why narcissists describe silence in extreme terms. They say it is abusive, cruel, or inhumane. They are not exaggerating their feelings, they are misinterpreting their source. What they are actually experiencing is the collapse of a dependency they mistook for connection. Silence exposes that dependency by refusing to maintain it, and because narcissists externalize responsibility for their inner states, they interpret the pain as something you are doing to them, rather than something that is happening within them. This is why silence feels like punishment rather than consequence. A consequence implies cause and effect. Punishment implies intent. The narcissist assumes intent because they cannot imagine a world where someone disengages without wanting to harm. In their relational universe, everything is strategic. Everything is a move. So when you go silent, they assume you are delivering a sentence. They do not see silence as self-protection. They see it as retaliation. And this misinterpretation fuels their sense of injustice. They believe they are being punished without explanation, rejected without trial, abandoned without warning, and erased without appeal. That combination is unbearable because it strips them of all leverage at once. There is no way to argue against silence. There is no way to guilt it, charm it, or intimidate it reliably. Silence does not respond to accusation. It does not defend itself. It does not justify its existence. And that is precisely why it feels so devastating. Silence removes the narcissist from the relational equation entirely. It places them outside the system where they once held influence, and being outside the system feels like exile. This is the psychological core of why silence feels like punishment to a narcissist, not because it hurts their feelings, but because it dismantles the illusion that they are indispensable. Silence proves, without words, that life continues without their participation. That proof is intolerable. It contradicts the grandiose belief that they are necessary, central, and irreplaceable. When that belief collapses, the narcissist does not experience humility, they experience terror, and terror quickly turns into blame. This is why silence so often provokes desperate attempts to re-enter your world, whether through provocation, seduction, or character assassination. They are not trying to reconnect, they are trying to reverse erasure. They are trying to restore a sense of being real. In the next section, we will look closely at these behaviors, not as random reactions, but as predictable attempts to escape the psychological punishment silence represents to the narcissistic mind. Once silence takes hold and begins to feel unbearable, the narcissist does not sit with it. They move. What looks from the outside like chaos, inconsistency, or emotional volatility is actually something very specific, a sequence of attempts to escape the psychological punishment silence represents to them. These behaviors are not random, and they are not about reconciliation. They are about restoring access, impact, and control. The moment silence removes their leverage, the narcissist begins searching for a way back into your emotional field because re-entry is the only thing that relieves the internal pressure they feel. The first move is often subtle provocation. They test the edges, sending neutral messages, practical questions, or seemingly harmless check-ins, not because they need information, but because they are checking whether the silence is real. Any response, even a cold one, tells them the door is still unlocked. If provocation fails, they escalate into emotional bait. This is where accusations appear, misunderstandings are manufactured, and old conflicts are resurrected. The goal is not resolution, the goal is reaction. Anger, defensiveness, explanation. Any of it will do. Reaction restores oxygen. When that fails, the narcissist often pivots into hoovering. Apologies suddenly appear, memories are invoked, vulnerability is performed. They may say they miss you, that they have changed, that you are the only one who ever understood them. This is not insight, it is strategy. Hoovering is an attempt to pull you back into the role of regulator, to make you responsible again for stabilizing their sense of self. If hoovering does not break the silence, the narcissist's behavior darkens, rage enters. They accuse you of cruelty, heartlessness, or abuse. They flip the narrative so that your boundary becomes their injury. This is not because they suddenly feel empathy. It is because rage is a faster way to force engagement than vulnerability. If they can provoke guilt or fear, they can regain influence. When rage still fails, many narcissists turn outward. Smear campaigns begin. They tell others that you abandoned them, that you are unstable, that you were the problem all along. This serves two functions. First, it creates an external audience to feed the persona that is starving under silence. Second, it applies indirect pressure, hoping the distortion reaches you and pulls you back into defending yourself. Defense, after all, is still engagement. When even this does not work, the narcissist often enters a phase of obsessive monitoring. They watch your social media, reread old messages, replay arguments in their mind, and engage in what psychologists sometimes call phantom conversations. These are imagined interactions where they argue with you internally, trying to regain the sense of control they lost. This is the quietest phase, and often the most revealing. The narcissist is no longer fighting you. They are fighting the reality that your silence created, a world where they do not matter in the way they believed they did. Throughout all of these phases, one thing remains consistent. None of these behaviors are about understanding you. None of them are about repair. They are about terminating silence. Silence is the enemy because it exposes their dependency and removes their power. Every behavior is an attempt to re-establish a feedback loop. And if none of these tactics succeed, something else begins to happen. The narcissist experiences a form of collapse that is rarely visible to others. It does not look like remorse or growth. It looks like emptiness, irritability, restlessness, and a compulsive need for distraction. They may seek new supply, new drama, or new validation elsewhere, but the original silence remains unresolved. It becomes a reference point they cannot erase. They know, somewhere beneath the defenses, that there exists a version of reality where they were not chosen, not chased, not fought for. That knowledge is destabilizing because it contradicts the core fantasy of indispensability. This is why silence works in a way confrontation never does. Confrontation allows the narcissist to stay central. Silence removes them from the center entirely. And once that removal happens, every attempt to escape it only confirms the truth they are trying to avoid, that your participation was never guaranteed, and that without it, their power dissolves. In the next section, we will examine why silence is more effective than explanation, argument, or closure, and why refusing to engage is not avoidance, but the most definitive boundary a narcissist can encounter. At this point, it becomes clear why silence affects a narcissist in a way no argument ever could. Argument feels active, but it is actually cooperative. Explanation feels mature, but it is still participatory. Even closure, which many people believe is healthy, often serves the narcissist more than it serves you. All of these actions keep you inside the relational system where the narcissist feels powerful. They allow the narcissist to remain central, to shape the narrative, and to extract emotional data from you. Silence does none of this. Silence is not a tactic of dominance. It is a withdrawal of participation. And that distinction is exactly why it works. When you argue with a narcissist, you are still offering them something they need, proof that they matter enough to engage with. Even if the argument is painful, even if you are defending yourself, the narcissist experiences it as relevance. They may lose the argument logically, but they win psychologically because your energy is still oriented toward them. Explanation works the same way. When you explain yourself, you place the narcissist in the position of judge, as if their understanding is required for your reality to be valid. This reinforces their sense of superiority and control. Closure often becomes the final gift you give them. It allows them to exit the relationship with a sense of resolution, narrative ownership, or moral positioning. Silence denies all of this. Silence does not argue, so there's nothing to win. Silence does not explain, so there's no authority granted. Silence does not offer closure, so there is no controlled ending. Instead, silence removes you from the equation entirely. This is why narcissists often say they just want to talk or just want clarity. What they are actually asking for is access. Access to your emotions, your attention, your reactions. They frame it as communication, but what they want is regulation. Silence refuses to regulate them. It leaves them with their own emotional states, something they are profoundly unequipped to manage. This is why silence feels unfair to them. It violates the unspoken contract they believe exists, that if they provoke, you must respond. If they accuse, you must defend. If they demand clarity, you must provide it. Silence breaks that contract. It introduces a new reality where you are not obligated to perform emotional labor for someone who harms you. And because the narcissist does not recognize your autonomy as legitimate, they interpret this refusal as punishment. From their perspective, you are withholding something they are entitled to. That sense of entitlement is key. Narcissists do not see engagement as mutual, they see it as owed. Silence exposes that belief by refusing to comply. It shows them that your energy is not theirs to command. This is also why silence feels so final. Arguments can be revisited, explanations can be reframed, closure can be undone with a new conversation. Silence offers no reopening. It does not invite negotiation, it does not leave a door ajar. It simply establishes a boundary that is lived, not debated. And that lived boundary is far more destabilizing than any verbal confrontation, because it cannot be dismantled through persuasion or manipulation. Silence forces the narcissist to confront a truth they resist with every defense they have, that they do not control your inner world. They cannot reach you unless you allow it. That realization strikes at the core of their relational strategy. Without access, they cannot regulate their self-image. Without reaction, they cannot feel real. This is why silence feels like punishment. It deprives them of the tools they rely on to maintain psychological equilibrium. It leaves them alone with the consequences of their behavior, without providing them an emotional buffer. And while this is deeply uncomfortable for them, it is not cruelty. It is reality. Silence does not punish, it stops rescuing, it stops cushioning the impact of their actions, it stops absorbing emotional fallout that was never yours to carry. For you, silence is not avoidance, it is alignment. It aligns your actions with your values, it aligns your nervous system with safety, it aligns your life with truth. And that alignment is something a narcissist cannot tolerate because it reveals how much they depended on your misalignment to function. In the next section, we will address a crucial clarification. Silence is not meant to change the narcissist, teach them a lesson, or make them suffer. It is meant to protect you. And understanding that distinction is essential to releasing guilt and reclaiming your sense of agency. By now, it should be clear why silence feels like punishment to a narcissist, even though punishment was never your intention. What they experience as cruelty is simply the moment you stop participating in a system that required your energy to survive. Silence does not attack them, it does not accuse them, it does not even explain itself. It just removes you, and that removal exposes something they have spent their entire lives trying not to see, that their sense of power, identity, and relevance depended on your engagement. When you went silent, you did not take revenge, you took yourself back. The narcissist calls this punishment because from their perspective, anything that limits access feels hostile. Anything that restores your autonomy feels like betrayal. Anything that ends their influence feels like a sentence. But none of that makes silence wrong. It makes silence honest. Silence reveals the truth of the dynamic without arguments, without drama, and without distortion. It shows that connection was conditional, not mutual. It shows that their pain is not caused by your absence, but by their dependence on control. And once you see that clearly, something important shifts inside you. You stop feeling responsible for their reaction. You stop questioning whether you are being too cold, too harsh, or too unforgiving. You begin to understand that boundaries are not punishments, and that peace does not require permission from the person who disturbed it. Silence is not about winning. It is not about proving a point. It is about alignment. It is about choosing not to live inside someone else's emotional economy anymore. When you stay silent, you are not withholding love. You are withdrawing labor. You are no longer regulating, soothing, explaining, or absorbing chaos that was never yours to carry. And that is why silence is so powerful. Not because it hurts them, but because it frees you. The narcissist may continue to frame your silence as cruelty. They may rewrite the story to make themselves the victim. They may never understand what actually happened. But understanding was never the requirement for your healing. Participation was. And you chose to stop participating. That choice is not punishment. It is self-respect in its quietest form. If this video helped you put language to something you lived through but could not explain, take a moment to like the video so it reaches others who need it. Subscribe to the channel if you want more clear, grounded psychological insight without manipulation or blame. And if you feel ready, share your experience in the comments, not to justify yourself, not to convince anyone, but to remind others that silence is not weakness. It is the moment you step out of a system that only worked when you stayed unwhole.